reading of the Sefer of Maccabeum Revii, also called the fourth book of Maccabees. Chapter 1. As I am going to demonstrate a most philosophical proposition, namely, that observant reasoning is absolute master of the passions, I would willingly advise you to give the utmost heed to philosophy, for reason is necessary to everyone as a step to science, and more especially it embraces the praise of prudence, the highest virtue. If then reasoning appears to hold the mastery over the passions, which stands in the way of temperance, such as gluttony and lust, it surely also and manifestly has the rule over the affections which are contrary to justice, such as malice, as those which are a hindrance to manliness, as wrath and pain and fear. How then is it perhaps some may say that reasoning, if it rule the affections, is not also master to fortify and ignorance? They attempt a ridiculous argument, for reasoning does not rule over its own affections, but over such as are contrary to justice and manliness and temperance and prudence, and yet over these so as to withstand without destroying them. I might prove to you from many other considerations that observant reasoning is sole master of the passions, but I shall prove it with the greatest force from the fortitude of Eleazar, and 7 brethren, and their mother, who suffered death in defiance of virtue. For all these contemning pains, even unto death, by this contempt demonstrates that reasoning has command over the passions. For their virtues, then it is right that I should command those men who died with their mother at this time, a commandment in behalf of rectitude and for their honors. I may count them happy, for they, winning admiration, not only from men in general, but even from their persecutors for their manliness and endurance, became the means of the destruction of the tyranny against their nation, having conquered the tyrant by their endurance, so that by them their country was purified. But now, we may now at once enter upon the question, having commenced, as is our wont, with laying down this doctrine, and so proceed to the account of these persons, giving glory to all-wise Elohim. The question, therefore, is whether reasoning is absolute master of the passions. Let us determine then what is reasoning, and what is passion, and how many forms of the passions, and whether reasoning bears sway over all of these. Reasoning is, then, intellect accompanied by a life of rectitude, putting foremost the consideration of wisdom. And wisdom is a knowledge of divine and things of men, and of their causes. And this is contained in the education of the Torah, by means of which we learn divine things reverently, and things of men profitably. And the forms of wisdom are prudence, and justice, and manliness, and temperance. The leading one of these prudence, by whose means indeed it is that reasoning bears rule over the passions. Of the passions, pleasure and pain are the two most comprehensive, and they also by nature refer to the soul. And there are many attendant affections surrounding pleasure and pain. Before pleasure is lust, and after pleasure, joy, and before pain is fear, and after pain is sorrow. Wrath is an affection, common to pleasure and to pain. If anyone will pay attention when it comes upon him, and there exists in pleasure a malicious disposition, which is most multiform of all the affections. In the soul it is arrogance, and love of money, and vaingloriousness, and contention, and faithlessness, and the evil eye. In the body it is greediness, and gormandizing, and solitary gluttony. As pleasure and pain are, therefore, two growths of the body and the soul, so there are many offshoots of these passions, and reasoning, the universal husbandman, purging and pruning these severely, and binding round, and watering, and transplanting in every way improves the materials for the morals and affections. For reasoning is the leader of the virtues, but it is the sole ruler of the passions. Observe then first, through the very things which stand in the way of temperance, that reasoning is absolute ruler of the passions. Now temperance consists of a command over the lusts. But the lusts, some belong to the soul, others to the body. And over each of these classes the reasoning appears to bear sway. For whence it is, otherwise, that when urged on to forbidden meats, we reject the gratification which would ensure from them. Is it not because reasoning is able to command the appetites? I believe so. Hence it is then that when lusting after water animals and birds and four-footed beasts and all kinds of food which are forbidden to us by the Torah, we withhold ourselves through the mastery of reasoning. For the affections of our appetites are resisted by the temperature, understanding, and bent back again, and all the impulses of the body are reined in by the reasoning. Fourth book of Maccabees, chapter 2. And what wonder if the lust of the soul after participation with what is beautiful are frustrated. On this ground, therefore, the temperate Jehoshaphat is praised in that by reasoning he subdued on reflection the indulgence of sense. For although young and ripe for sexual intercourse, he abrogated by reasoning the stimulus of his passions. And it is not merely the stimulus of sensual indulgence, but that of every desire that reasoning is able to master. For instance, the Torah says, "You shall not covet your neighbor's woman, nor anything that belongs to your neighbor." Now then, since it is the Torah which has forbidden us to desire, I shall much the more easily persuade you that reasoning is able to govern our lusts, just as it does the affections, which are impediments to justice. Since in what way is a solitary eater and a glutton and a drunkard reclaimed, unless it be clear that reasoning is master of the passions? A man, therefore, who regulates his course by the Torah, even if he be a lover of money, straightway puts force upon his own disposition, lending to the needy without interest, and concealing the debt of the incoming Shabbat. And should a man be parsimonious, he is ruled by the Torah, acting through reasoning, so that he does not glean his harvest crops, nor vintage, and in reference to other points we may perceive that it is reasoning that conquers his passions, for the Torah conquers even affection toward parents, not surrendering virtue on their account, and it prevails over marriage love, condemning it when transgressing the Torah, and it masters it over the love of parents toward their children, for they punish them for vice, and it domineers over the intimacy of friends, reproving them when wicked. And think not it a strange assertion that reasoning can in behalf of the Torah conquer even enmity. It allows not to cut down the cultivated herbage of an enemy, and preserves it from the destroyers, and collects their fallen ruins, and reason appears to be master of the more violent passions, as love of empire, and empty boasting, and slander. For the temperate understanding repeals all these malignant passions, as it does wrath, for it masters even this. Thus Moshe, when angered against Dathan and Aviram, did nothing to them in wrath, but regulated his anger by reasoning. For the temperate mind is able, as I said, to be superior to the passions, and to transfer some, and to destroy others. For why else does our most wise father Yaakov blame Shimeon and Levi for having irrationally slain the whole race of the Shechemim, of Shechem, saying, "Cursed be their anger"? For if reasoning did not possess the power of subduing angry affections, he would not have spoken thus. For at the time when Elohim created man, he implanted within him his passions and moral nature. And at that time he enthroned above all the Kodesh leader mind, through the medium of the senses, and he gave a Torah to this mind, and living according to which it will maintain a temperature, and just, and good, and manly reign. How then a man may say, if reasoning be master over the passions, has it no control over forgetfulness and ignorance? Chapter 3, 4th book of Maccabees. The argument is exceedingly ridiculous. The question, how then a man may say, if reasoning be master of the passions, Has it no control over forgetfulness and ignorance? This exceedingly ridiculous question, for reasoning does not appear to bear sway over its own affection, but over those of the body, in such a way as that any one of you may not be able to root out desire, but reasoning will enable you to avoid being enslaved to it. One may not be able to root out anger from the soul, but it is possible to withstand anger. Any one of you, whom you may not be able to eradicate malice, but reasoning has force to work with you to prevent you yielding to malice. For reasoning is not an eradicator, but an antagonist of the passions, and this may be more clearly comprehended from the thirst of King David. For after David had been attacking the Philistine the whole day, he, with his soldiers of his nation, slew many of them. Then, when evening came, sweating and very weary, he came to the royal tent about which the entire host of our ancestors was encamped. Now, all the rest of them were at supper, but the king, being very much athirst, although he had numerous springs, could not by their means quench his thirst, but a certain irrational longing for the water in the enemy's camp grew stronger and fiercer upon him, and consumed him with languish. Wherefore his bodyguards, being troubled at his longing of the king, 2 valiant young soldiers, reverencing the desire of the king, put on their panoplies, and, taking a pitcher, got over the ramparts of the enemies, and unperceived by the guardians of the gate, they went through the whole camp of the enemy in quest, and having boldly discovered the fountain, they filled out of it the draught for the king. But he, though parched with thirst, reasoned that a draught reputed of equal value to blood would be terribly dangerous to his soul. Wherefore, setting up reasoning in the opposition to his desire, he poured out the draught to Elohim. For the temperate mind has power to conquer the pressure of the passions, and to quench the fires of excitement, and to wrestle down the pains of the body, however excessive, and through the excellency of reasoning, to abominate all the assaults of the passion. But the occasion now invites us to give an illustration of temperate reasoning from history. For at a time when our fathers were in possession of undisturbed peace, shalom, through obedience to the Torah, and were prosperous, so that Seleucus Nicanor, the king of Asia, both assigned them money for divine service and accepted from their form of government. Then certain persons, bringing in new things contrary to the general unanimity in various ways, fell into calamities. Fourth book of Maccabees, chapter 4. For a certain man named Shimeon, who was in opposition to Antiochus, who once held the high priesthood for life, and was an honorable and good man, After that, by slandering him in every way, he could not injure him with the people, went away as an exile, with the intention of betraying his country. Thence the coming of Apollonius, the military governor of Aram, and Phoenicia, and Cilicia. He said, having good will to the king's affairs, I am come to inform you that infinite private wealth is laid up in the treasuries of Jerusalem, which do not belong to the temple, but pertain to King Seleucus. Apollonius, acquainting himself with the particulars of this, praised Simeon for his care of the king's interests, and going up to Seleucus, informed him of the treasure, and getting authority about it, and quickly advancing into our country with the accursed Simeon and a very heavy force, he said that he came with the commands of the king that he should take the private money in the treasury. And the nation, indignant at this proclamation, and replying to the effect that it was extremely unfair that those who had committed deposits to the sacred treasury should be deprived of them, resisted as well as they could. But Apollonius went away with threats into the temple, and the priests with the women and the children, having supplicated Elohim to throw his shield over the Kodesh, despised place. And Apollonius, going up with his armed force to the seizure of the treasury, there appeared from the Shamaim, heaven, angels riding on horseback, all radiant in armor, filling them with much fear and trembling. And Apollonius fell half dead upon the court which is open to all nations, and extended his hands to heaven, and implored the Ivrim, the Hebrews, with tears to pray for him, and propitiate the heavenly host. For he said that he had sinned so as to be consequently worthy of death, and that if he were saved, he would celebrate to all men the blessedness of the Kodesh place. Oniyahu, the Kohen Hagadol, the high priest, induced these words, although by other reasoning anxious by King Seleucus, should not oppose that Apollonius was slain by the device of men, and not by divine punishment, prayed for him. And he, being thus unexpectedly saved, departed to manifest to the king what had happened to him. But on the death of Seleucus the king, his son Antiochus Epiphanes succeeded to the kingdom, a man of haughty pride and terrible, who, having deposed Oniyahu from the Kohen Hagadol, the high priesthood, appointed his brother Jachan to be the high priest, who had made a covenant, if he would give him this authority, to pay yearly 3,660 talents. And he committed to him the high priesthood and rulership over the nation. And he both changed the manner of living of the people, and perverted their civil customs into all iniquity, so that he not only erected a gymnasium on the very citadel of our country, but neglected the guardianship of the temple, at which divine vengeance being grieved, incited Antiochus himself against them for being at war with Ptolemy in Mitzrayim. He heard that on a report of his death being spread abroad, the inhabitants of Jerusalem had exceedingly rejoiced, and he quickly marched against them. And having subdued them, he established a decree that if any of them lived according to the Torah of his country, he should die. And when he could by no means destroy by his decrees the obedience to the Torah of the nation, but saw all his threats and punishments without effect. For even women, because they continued to circumcise their children with Brit Milah, were flung down for a pierceable along with them, knowing beforehand of the punishment. When, therefore, his decree was disregarded by the people, he himself compelled by many of tortures everyone of this race, by tasting forbidden meats, to adjure the Yahudic faith. Fourth book of Maccabees, chapter 5. The tyrant Antiochus, therefore, sitting in a public state with his assessors upon a certain lofty place, with his armed troops standing in a circle around him, commanded his spear-bearers to seize everyone of the Ephraim, and to compel them to taste swine's flesh, and things offered to idols. And should any of them be unwilling to eat the accursed food, they were to be tortured on the wheel, and so killed. And when many had been seized, a foremost man of the assembly, an Ivri by name Eleazar, a Kohanim, a priest by family, and profession a lawyer, and advanced in many years, and for this reason known to many of the king's followers as brought near to him. And Antiochus, seeing him, said, I would counsel you, old man, before your torture begins, to taste the swine's flesh, and save your life. For I feel respect for your age and gray head, which, since you have had so long, you appear to me to be no philosopher in retaining the superstitions of the Yehudim. For wherefore, since nature has conferred upon you the most excellent flesh of this animal, do you loathe it? It seems senseless not to enjoy what is pleasant, yet not disgraceful, from the nations, the goyim of sinfulness, to reject the boons of nature, and you will be acting, I think, still more senselessly, if you follow vain conceits about truth. And you will moreover be despising me to your own punishment. Will you not awake from your trifling philosophy, and give up the folly of your nation, and regaining the understanding worthy of your age, search into the truth and expedient course, and reverencing my kindly admonition, have pity upon your own years. For bear in mind that if there be any power which watches over this faith of yours, it will pardon you for all transgressions of the Torah which you commit through compulsion. While the tyrant incited him in this manner to the eating of swine's flesh, which is against the Torah, Eleazar begged permission to speak. And having received power to speak, he began thus to deliver himself. We, O Antiochus, who are persuaded that we live under a Kodesh Torah, considered no compulsion to be so forcibly as obedience to that Torah. Wherefore we consider that we ought not in any point to transgress the Torah. And indeed, where our Torah, as you suppose, not truly divine, if we wrongly think it divine, we should have no right even in that case to destroy our sense of the faith, thinking not eating the unclean, then a trifling of offense. For transgression of the Torah, whether in small or great matters, is of equal moment. For in either case, the Torah is equally cited. But you deride our philosophy as though we live irrationally in it. Yet it instructs us in temperance, so that we are superior to all pleasure and lusts, and it exercises us in manliness, so that we cheerfully undergo every grievance, and it instructs us in justice, so that in all our dealings we render that which is due, and it teaches us piety, so that we worship the one, Echad only, Elohim, becomingly. Wherefore it is that we eat not that which is unclean. For believing that the Torah was established by Elohim, we are convinced that the Creator of the world, in giving His Torah, sympathizes with our nature. Those things which are convenient to our souls, He has directed us to eat. But those which are repugnant to them, He has interdicted. But tyrant-like, you not only force us to break the Torah, but also to eat, that you may ridicule us as we thus profanely eat. But you shall not have this cause of laughter against me, nor will I transgress the sacred oaths of my forefathers to guard the Torah. No, not if you pluck out my eyes and consume my entrails. I am not so old and void of manliness, but that my rational powers are youthful in defense of my faith. Now then, prepare your wheels, and kindle a fiercer flame. I will not so compassionate my old age as on account to break the Torah of my country. I will not belie you, O Torah, my instructor, or forsake you, O beloved temperance. I will not put you to shame, O philosopher reason, or deny you, O honorable Kohanim priesthood, and science of the Torah. Mouth, you shall not pollute my old age, nor for the full statue of a perfect life my Father shall receive me pure, not having qualied before your compulsions, though unto death. For over the wicked you shall tyrannize, but you shall not lord it over my thoughts about the faith, either by your arguments or through deed. EThCeper of Maccabees, chapter 6. When Eleazar had in this manner answered the exhortations of the tyrant, the spear-bearers came up and rudely haled Eleazar to the instruments of torture. And first they stripped the old man, adorned as he was with the comeliness of piety. Then, tying back his arms and hands, they disdainfully used him with stripes. A herald opposite carrying out, "Obey the commands of the king." But Eleazar, the Kohanim, the high-minded and truly noble, as one tortured in a dream, regarded it not all. But rising his eyes on high to heaven, the old man's flesh was stripped off by the scourges, and his blood streamed down, and his sides were pierced through, and falling upon the ground from his body, having no power to support the pains, he yet kept his reasoning upright and unbending. Then one of the harsh spear-bearers leaped upon his belly as he was falling to force him upright, but he endured the pains, and despised the cruelty, and preserved through his indignities. And like a noble athlete, the old man, when struck, vanquished his torturers. His countenance sweating, and he panted for breath, he was admired for the very torturers of his courage. Wherefore, partly in pity for his old age, partially for the sympathy of acquaintance, and partially in admiration of his endurance, some of his attendants of the king said, "Why do you unreasonably destroy yourself, O Eleazar, with these miseries? We will bring you some meat cooked by yourself, and go and do you save yourself by pretending that you have eaten swine's flesh?" And Eleazar, as though the advice more painfully tortured him, cried out, "Let not us who are the children of Abraham be so evil advised as be giving way to make use of an unbecoming pretense. For it were irrational if, having lifted up to old age in all truth, and having scrupulously guarded our character for it, we should now turn back, and ourselves should become a pattern of impurity to the young, and impiety to the young, as being an example of pollution eating. It would be so disgraceful if we should live on some short time, and that scorned by all men for cowardice, and commanded by the tyrant for unmanliness, by not contending to the death of our divine Torah. Wherefore do you, O children of Abraham, die nobly for your faith? Ye spear-bearers of the tyrant, why do ye linger, beholding on so high-minded against misery, and not changing at their pity? They led him to the fire. Then, with the wickedly contrived instruments, they burned him on the fire, and poured stinking fluids down into his nostrils. And he, being at length burnt down to the bones, and about to expire, raised his eyes Elohimward, and said, "O you know, O Elohim Yahweh, that when I might have been saved, I am slain for the sake of the Torah by tortures of fire. Be merciful to your people, and be satisfied with the punishment of me on their account. Let my blood be a purification for them, and take my life in recompense for theirs." Thus speaking, the righteous man departed, noble in his torments, and even to the agony of death resisted in his reasoning for the sake of Torah. Confessedly, therefore, observant reasoning is master of the passions. For had the passions been superior to reasoning, I would have given them the witness of this mastery. But now, since reasoning conquered the passions, we befittingly awarded it the authority of first place. And it is but fair that we should allow that the power belongs to reasoning, since it masters external miseries. Ridiculous would it be were it not so, and I prove that reasoning has not only mastered pains, but that it also is superior to the pleasures, and withstands them. EThCeper of Maccabees, chapter 7. The reasoning of our father Eleazar, like a first-rate pilot steering the vessel of piety in the sea of passions, and flouted by the threats of a tyrant, and overwhelmed with the breakers of torture, in no way shifted the rudder of piety till it sailed into the harbor of victory over death. Not so has ever a city when besieged held out against many a various machines, as did that righteous man, when his pious soul was tried with the fiery trial of tortures and rackings, moved his besiegers through the observant reasoning that shielded him. For Father Eleazar, protecting his disposition, broke the raging waves of the passions as with a jutting promontory. O Kohanim worthy of the priesthood, you did not pollute your sacred teeth, nor make your appetite, which had always embraced the clean and lawful, a partaker of profanity, O harmonizer with the Torah, and sage devoted to a Kodesh life. Of such a character ought those to be who perform the duties of the Torah at the risk of their own blood, and defend it with generous sweat by suffering even unto death. You, Father, have gloriously established our right government by your endurance, and making of much account our service past, prevented its destruction, and by your deeds had made credible the words of philosophy of the Torah. O aged man of more power than torture, elder, more vigorous than fire, greatest king over the passions, Eleazar. For as Father Aaron, armed with a censer hastening through the consuming fire, vanquished the flame-bearing angel on Eleazar, and descendant of Aaron, wasted away by the fire, did not give up his reasoning, and what is most wonderful, though an old man, through the labors of his body were now spent, and his fibers were relaxed, and his sinews worn out, he recovered youth by the Ruach HaKodesh of reasoning, and the reasoning of Yitzhak. He rendered powerless the many-headed instruments. O blessed old age and revered gray head and life obedient to the Torah, which the faithful seal of death perfected. O then, an old man, through faith despised torture even unto death, confessedly observant, reasoning is ruler of the passions. But perhaps some might say, if it is not all who conquer passions, as all do not possess wise reasoning, but they who have meditated upon the faith with their whole heart, these alone can master the passions of the flesh. They who believe that to Elohim they die not, for as our forefathers Abraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov, they lived to Elohim. This circumstance, then, is by no means an objection, that some who have weak reasoning are governed by their passions, since what person, walking religiously by the whole rule of philosophy, and believing in Elohim, and knowing that it is a blessed thing to endure all kinds of hardships for virtue, would not, for the sake of the faith, master his passions? For the wise and brave man only is master over his passions. Whence it is that even boys, imbued with the philosophy of observing, reasoning in Torah, have conquered still more bitter tortures. For when the tyrant was manifestly vanquished in his first attempt in being unable to force the old man to eat the unclean thing. The Sefer of 4th Maccabees, chapter 8. Then indeed, vehemently swayed with his passion, he commanded to bring others of the adult Ivrim, and if they would not eat of the unclean, abominable thing, to let them go when they had eaten. But if they objected, to torment them more grievously. The tyrant, having given this charge, 7 brethren were brought into his presence, along with their aged mother, handsome and modest, and well-born, and altogether comely, whom, when the tyrant beheld, encircling their mother as in a dance, he was pleased at them, and being struck with their becoming and indignious mien, smiled upon them, and calling them near, said, O youth, with favorable feelings I admire the beauty of each of you, and greatly honoring so numerous a band of brethren, I not only counsel you not to share the madness of the old man who has been tortured before, but I do beg you to yield and to enjoy my friendship, and for I possess the power not only of punishing those who disobey my command, but in doing good to those who obey me. Put confidence in me, then, and you shall receive places of authority in my government, if you forsake all your national ordinances, and, conforming to the Yavani Greeks' mode of life, alter your rule, and revel in youth's delight, for if you provoke me by your disobedience, you will compel me to destroy you, everyone, with terrible punishment by torture. Have mercy then upon your own selves, whom I, although an enemy, compassionate for your age and comeliness. Will you not reason upon this, that if you disobey, there will be nothing left for you but to die in tortures? Thus speaking, he ordered the instruments of torture to be brought forward, that very fear might prevail upon them to eat the unclean meat. And when the spearmen brought forward the wheels, and the racks, and the hooks, and catapults, and cauldrons, pans, and finger racks, and iron hands, and wedges, and bellows, the tyrant continued, Fear, young men, and the righteousness which ye worship will be merciful to you if you err from compulsions. Now, they having listened to the words of persuasion, and seeing the fearful instruments, not only were not afraid, but even answered the arguments of the tyrant, and through their good reasoning destroyed his power. Now let us consider the matter. Had any of them been weak-spirited and cowardly among them, what reasonings would they have employed but these? O wretched that we are, and exceedingly senseless! When the king exhorts us and calls us to his bounty, should we not obey him? Why do we cheer ourselves with vain counsels and venture upon a disobedient bringing death? Shall we not fear, O brethren, the instrument of torture, and weigh the threatenings of torture, and shun this vain glory and destructive pride? Let us have compassion upon our age, and relent over the years of our mother, and let us bear in mind that we shall be dying as rebels, and divine Kodesh justice will pardon us if we fear the king through necessity. Why withdraw ourselves from the most sweet life, and deprive ourselves of this pleasant world? Let us not oppose necessity, nor seek vainglory by our own excruciation. The Torah itself is not forward to put us to death, if we dread torture. Whence has such agony zeal taken root in us, and such fatal obstinacy approved itself to us, when we might live unmolested by the king? But nothing of this kind did the young men say or think when about to be tortured, for they were well aware of the sufferings and masters of the pains, so that as soon as the tyrant had ceased counseling them to eat the unclean, unprofane, abominable things, they all together with one voice, as far from the same heart, said, EThCeper of Maccabees, chapter 9. Why delay you, O tyrant? For we are readier to die than to transgress the injunctions of our fathers. And we should be disgracing our fathers if we did not obey the Torah and take knowledge for our guide. O tyrant, counselor of Torah breaking, do not hating us as you do. Pity us more than we pity ourselves, or we account escape to be worse than death. And you think to scare us by threatening us with death by tortures, as though you had learned nothing by the death of Eleazar. But if aged men of the Ephraim, descendants of Abraham, had died in the cause of the faith after enduring torture, more rightly should we younger men die, scorning your cruel tortures, with our aged instructor overcome. Make the attempt, then, O tyrant, and if you put us to death for our faith, think not that you harm us by torturing us, for we, through this ill treatment and endurance, shall bear off the rewards of virtue. But you, for the wicked and despicable slaughter of us, shall from the Kodesh vengeance endure eternal torture by fire. When they had thus spoken, the tyrant was not only exacerbated against them as being refractory, but enraged with them as being ungrateful, so that at his bidding the torturers brought forth the eldest of them, and tearing through his tunic, bound his hands and his arms on each side with thongs. And when they had labored hard without effect in scourging him, they hurled him upon the wheel. And the noble youth extended upon this, became dislocated, and with every member disjointed, he exclaimed in expultation, O most accursed tyrant, and enemy of heavenly justice, and cruel-hearted, I am no murderer, nor sacrilegious man, whom you thus ill-use, but a defender of the Kodesh Torah. And when the spearman said, Consent to eat, that you may be released from your tortures, he answered, Not so powerful. O accursed ministers, is your will, as to stifle my reasoning. Cut my limbs, and burn my flesh, and twist my joints. For through all my torments I will convince you that the children of the Ephraim are alone, unconquered in behalf of virtue. While he was saying this, they heaped up fuel, and setting fire to it, strained him upon the wheel still more, and the wheel was defiled all over with blood, and the hot ashes were quenched by the droppings of gore, and pieces of flesh were scattered upon the axles of the machine. And although the framework of his bones was now destroyed by the high-minded, and Abrahamic youth did not groan, but as though transformed by fire into immortality, he nobly endured the rackings, saying, Imitate me, O brethren, nor ever desert your station, nor adjure your brotherhood in courage. Fight the Kodesh, an honorable fight of the faith, by which means our just and paternal providence, becoming merciful to our nation, will punish the pestilent tyrant. And saying this, the revered youth abruptly closed his eyes, and when all admired his courageous soul, the spearman brought forth him who was second in point of age, and having put on iron hands, bound him with pointing hooks to the catapult. And when, on inquiring whether he would eat before he was tortured, they heard his noble sentiment, after they, with the iron hand, had violently dragged all the flesh from the neck to the chin, a panther-like beast tore off the very skin of his head, but he, bearing with firmness this misery, said, How sweet is every form of death for the faith of our fathers. And he said to the tyrant, Think you not, most cruel of all tyrants, that you are now tortured more than I, finding your overweening conception of tyranny conquered by our patience in behalf of our faith. For I lighten my suffering by the pleasures which are connected with virtue, but you are tortured with threatenings for impiety, and you shall not escape, most corrupt tyrant, the vengeance of Kodesh wrath upon you. The fourth Sefer of Maccabees, chapter 10. Now this one, having endured this praiseworthy death, the third was brought along and exhorted by many to taste and save his life. But he cried out and said, Know ye not that the Father of those who are dead begot me also, and that the same mother bore me, and that I was brought up in these same tents. I abjure not the noble relationship of my brethren. Now then, whatsoever instrument of vengeance ye have, apply to my body also, for ye are not able to touch, even if ye wish it, my soul, nephesh. But they, highly incensed at his boldness of speech, dislocated his hands and feet with the racking engines, and wrenching them from their sockets, dismembered him. And they dragged round his fingers and his arms, and his legs and his ankles, and not being able by any means to strangle him, they tore off his skin, together with the extreme tips of his fingers, flayed him, and then haled him to the wheel, around which his vertebral joints were loosened, and he saw his own flesh tore to shreds, and streams of blood flowing from his entrails. And when about to die, he said, We, O accursed tyrant, suffer this for the sake of our divine education and virtue. But you, for your impiety and bloodshedding, shall endure indissoluble torments. And thus, having died worthily of his brethren, they dragged forward the fourth, saying, Do not share the madness of your brethren, but give regard to the king, and save yourself. But he said to them, You have not a fire so scorching as to make me play the coward. By the blessed death of my brethren, and the eternal punishment of the tyrant, and the glorious life of the pious, I will not repudiate the noble brotherhood. Invent, O tyrant, tortures, that you may learn even through them that I am the brother of those tormented before. When he said this, the bloodthirsty and murderous and unhallowed Antiochus ordered his tongue to be cut out. But he said, Even if you take away the organs by speech, yet Elohim hears the silence. Behold, my tongue is extended. Cut it off, for not for that shall you extirpate our reasoning. Gladly do we lose our limbs in behalf of our Elohim, but Elohim shall speedily find you, since you cut off the tongue and instrument of divine melody. The Sefer of the fourth book of Maccabees, chapter 11. And when he had died, disfigured from his torment, the fifth leaped forward and said, I intend not to, O tyrant, to get excused from the torment which is in behalf of virtue. But I have come on my own accord, that by the death of me you may, O heavenly vengeance, a punishment for more crimes, O hater of virtue and of men, what have we done that you thus revel in our blood? Does it seem evil to you that we worship the founder of all things, and live according to his surpassing Torah? But this is worthy of honors, not torments. Had you been capable of the higher feelings of man, and possess the hope of YHWHY from Elohim, his deliverance, behold, now being alien from Elohim, you make war against those who are observant toward Elohim. As he said this, the bearers bound him and drew him to the catapult, to which, binding him to his knees and fastening them with iron fetters, they bent down his loins upon the wedge of the wheel, and his body was then dismembered, scorpion-fashioned, with his breath thus confined, and his body strangled. He said, "A great favor you have bestowed upon us, O tyrant, by enabling us to manifest our adherence to the Torah by means of noble sufferings." He also, being dead, the sixth, a quiet youth, was brought out, and on the tyrant asked him whether he would eat and be delivered. He said, "I am indeed younger than my brothers, but in understanding I am as old, for having been born and reared unto the same end, we are bound to die also in behalf of the same cause, so that if ye think proper to torment us for not eating the abominable food, the unclean swine, torment." As he said this, they brought him to the wheel, extended upon which, with his limbs racked and dislocated, he was gradually roasted from beneath, and having heated sharp spits as they approached them to his back, and having transfixed his sides, they burned away his entrails. And he, while tormented, said, "O period good and Kodesh, in which for the sake of the flesh we, brethren, have been called to the contest of pain, and have not been conquered. For observant understanding, O tyrant, is unconquered, armed with upright Zadok virtue. I also shall depart with my brethren, I too bearing with me a great avenger, O deviser of tortures, and enemy of the truly Kodesh and pious. We 6 youths have destroyed your tyranny, for is not your inability to overrule our reasoning, and to compel us to eat that unclean, to your destruction. Your fire is cold to us, your catapults are painless, and your violence harmless. For the guards, not of the tyrant, but of the divine Torah, are our defenders. Through this we keep our reasoning unconquered. Fourth book of Maccabees, chapter 12. When he too had undergone blessed martyrdom, and died in the cauldron into which he had been thrown, the 7th, the youngest of all, came forward, whom the tyrant, pitying, though he had been dreadfully reproached by his brethren, seeing him already encompassed with chains, had him brought nearer, and endeavored to counsel him, saying, "You see the end of the madness of your brethren, for they have died to torture through disobedience, and you, if disobedient to me, having been miserably tormented, will yourself perish prematurely. But if you obey me, you shall be my friend, and have a charge over the affairs of the kingdom. And having thus exhorted him, he sent for the mother of the boy, that, by condoling with her for the loss of so many sons, he might incline her, through the hope of safety, to render the survivor obedient. And he, after his mother had urged him on in the Ivrite tongue, as we soon relate, said, Release me, that I may speak to the king and all his friends. And they, rejoicing exceedingly at the promise of the youth, quickly let him go. And he, running up to the pan, said, Impious tyrant and most blasphemous man, were you not ashamed, having received posterity and a kingdom from Elohim, to slay his servants and to rack the doers of his kodeshness? Wherefore the divine vengeance is reserving you for eternal fire and torment, which shall cling to you for all time, where you were not ashamed, man as you are, yet most savage, to cut out the tongues of men of like feeling and origin, and having thus abused, tortured them. But they, bravely dying, fulfilling their faith towards Elohim, but you shall groan accursed for your deserts of having slain without cause the champions of virtue. Wherefore he continued, I myself, being about to die, will not forsake my brethren, and I call upon Yahweh Elohim of my fathers to be merciful to my race. But you, both living and dead, will he punish. Thus having prayed, he hurled himself into the pans, and so expired. EThCeper of Maccabees, chapter 13. If then the 7 brethren despise troubles even unto death, it is confessed on all sides that righteous reasoning is absolute master over the passions. For just as if had they, as slaves to the passions, eaten of the unholy, we should have said that they have been conquered by them. Now it is not so, but by the means of the reasoning which is praised by Elohim, they mastered their passions, and it is impossible to overlook the leadership of reflection, for it gained the victory over both passions and troubles. How then can we avoid, according to these men, mastery of the passions through right reasoning, since they drew not back from the pains of fire? For just as by means of towers projecting in front of harbors, men breaks the threatening waves, and thus assures a still course to vessel entering a port, so that 7 toward right reasoning of the young men, securing the harbor of the faith, conquered the intemperance of passion, for having arranged a holy choir of piety, they, encouraged one another, saying, Brethren, may we die brotherly for the Torah. Let us imitate 3 young men in Ashur, who despise the equally afflicting furnace. Let us not be cowards in the manifestation of kodeshness. And one said, Courage, brother, and another, Nobly endure, and another, Remember of what stock ye are, and by the hand of our father Yitzhak endured to be slain for the sake of kodeshness. And one and all, looking on each other serene and confident, said, Let us sacrifice with all our heart and with all our souls to Elohim who gave them, and employ our bodies for keeping of the Torah. Let us not hear him who thinks he kills, for great is the trial of soul and danger of eternal torment laid upon for those who transgress the commandments of Elohim. Let us arm ourselves, therefore, in the abnegation of divine reasoning. If we suffer thus, Abraham and Yitzhak and Yaakov will receive us, and all the fathers who command us. And as each one of the brethren was hauled away, the rest exclaimed, Disgrace us not, O brethren, nor falsify those who died before you, now, who are not ignorant of the charm of brotherhood which the Kodesh and all-wise providence has imparted through fathers to children, and has engendered through the mother's womb, in which these brothers, having remained an equal time, and having been formed for the same period, and been increased by the same blood, and having been perfected through the same principles of life, and having been brought forth at equal intervals, and having sucked milk from the same fountains, hence their brotherly souls are reared up lovingly together, and increase the more powerful by reason of this simultaneous rearing, and by daily intercourse, and by the other education and exercise in the Torah of Elohim. Brotherly love in being thus sympathetic constituted, the 7 brethren had a more sympathetic, mutually harmony, for being educated in the same Torah and practicing the same virtues, mitzvot, and reared up in a just course of life, they increased this harmony with each other, for a like adore for what is right and honorable, increased their fellow feelings toward each other, for it acting along with the faith made their brotherly feelings more desirable to them, and yet, although nature and intercourse and virtuous morals increased their brotherly love for those who were left to endure to behold their brethren, who were ill-used for their faith, tortured even unto death. EThCeper of Maccabees, chapter 14. And more than this, they even urged them on to this ill treatment, so that they not only despised pains themselves, but they even got the better of the affections of brotherly love. O reasonings more royal than a king, and fiercer than free men, sacred and harmonious concepts of the 7 brethren as concerning piety. None of the 7 youths turned cowardly or shrank back from death, but all of them, as though running the road to immortality, steadfastness, hastened on to death through tortures. For just as hands and feet are moved sympathetically with the directions of the soul, so those Kodesh youth agreed unto death for the sake of their faith, as though the immortal soul of their faith. O Kodesh, 7 of harmonious brethren, for as the 7 days of creation about the faith, so the youth circling around the number 7 annaled the fear of torment. We now shudder at the recital of the afflictions of those young men, but they not only beheld and not only heard the immediate execution of the threat, but undergoing it, persevered, and that through the pains of fire and what would be more painful, for the power of the fire, being sharp and quick, speedily dissolved their bodies, and think it not wonderful that reasoning bore rule over those men in their torments, when even a woman's mind despised more manifold pains, for the mother of those 7 youths endured the rackings of her children. And consider how comprehensive is the love of offspring, which draws everyone to sympathy of affection. Where irrational animals possess a similar sympathy and love for their offspring with men. The tame birds frequenting the roofs of our houses defend their fledglings. Others build their nests and hatch their young in the tops of mountains and in the precipices of valleys and the holes and tops of trees, and keep off the intruder. And if not able to do this, they fly circling around them in agony of affection, calling out to their own note, and save their offspring in whatsoever manner they are able. But why should we point attention to the sympathy toward children shown by irrational animals? The very bees, at the sense of honey, making attack all who approach, and pierce with their sting as with swords those who draw near with their hive, and repel them even unto death. But sympathy with her children did not turn aside the mother of the young men, who had a ruach kindred with that of Abraham. EThCeper of Maccabees, chapter 15. O reasoning of the sons, master over their passions, and the faith more desirable to a mother than progeny. The mother, when 2 things were set before her, the faith, and the safety of her 7 sons for a time, on the conditional promise of a tyrant, rather elected the faith, which, according to Elohim, preserves to eternal life. Kai lelam va'ed. Oh, in what way can I describe ethically the affections of parents towards their children, the resemblance of soul, and the form engrafted into the small type of a child in a wonderful manner, especially through the greater sympathy of a mother's with the feelings of those born them. For by now much mothers are by nature weak in disposition, and prolific in offspring, by so much the fonder they are of the children. And of all mothers, the mother of 7 of the fondest of children, who in 7 childbirths had deeply endangered love towards them, and through her many pains undergone in connection which each of them was compelled to feel sympathy with them, yet through fear of Elohim, who neglected the temporary salvation of her children, not but that, on account of the excellent disposition to the Torah, her maternal affection toward them was increased, for they were both just and temperate and manly and high-minded and fond of their brethren, and so fond of their mother that even unto death they obeyed her by observing the Torah. And yet, through there were so many circumstances connected with love of children to draw on a mother to sympathy. In the case of them, there were various tortures able to pervert her principles, but she inclined each one separately and altogether to death for the faith. O Kodesh nature of parental feeling and reward of bringing up children, and unconquerable maternal affection at the racking and roasting of each one of them, the observant mother was prevented by the faith from changing. She beheld her children's flesh dissolving around the fire, and their extremities quivering on the ground, and the flesh of their heads dropped forward down to their beards like masks. O mother, who was tried at this time with bitter pangs than those of paternal. O you only woman who was brought forth perfect, Kodesh, your firstborn expiring, turned you not, nor the second looking miserable in his torments, nor the third breathing out his soul, nor when you did behold the eyes of each of them looking sternly upon their tortures, and their nostrils foreboding death, did you weep? When you did see your children's flesh heaped upon children's flesh, that upon being torn off, heads decapitated upon heads, dead falling upon the dead, and a choir of children turned through torture, being a burying ground. You lamented not, nor so do siren melodies, or songs of swans attracting the hearers to listening. O voices of children, calling upon your mother in the midst of torments. With what manner of torment was the mother herself tortured, as her sons were undergoing the wheel and the fires? But observant reasoning having strengthened her, courage in the midst of suffering enabled her to forego, for the time, parental love, although beholding the destruction of her 7 children, her sons. The noble mother, after one embraced, stripped off her feelings through faith in Elohim. For just as in a council room, beholding in her own soul vehement counselors, nature of patronage and love of her children, and the racking of her children, she holding 2 votes, one for the death, the other for the preservation of her children, did not lean to that which would have saved her children for the safety of a brief space. But this daughter of Abraham remembered his Kodesh fortitude. O Kodesh mother of a nation, avenger of the Torah, and defender of the faith, and prime bearer in the battle of the affections. O nobler in endurance than males, and more manly than men in patience. For as the ark of Noah, bearing the world, in the world filling flood, bore up against the waves, so you, the guardian of the Torah, who surrounded on every side by the flood of passions, and straitened by violent storms, which were the torments of your children, did bear up nobly against the storms, against the faith. 4th of Maccabees, chapter 16. If then even a woman, and that an old-aged one, and the mother of 7 children endured to see her children's torment even unto death, confessedly observant reasoning is master even of the passions. I have proved then that not only men have obtained the mastery of their passions, but also that a woman despised the greatest torments. And not so fierce were the lions around Daniel, nor the furnace of Mishael, burning with most vehement fire, as that natural love of children burning within her, when she beheld her 7 sons tortured. But with the reasoning of the faith, the mother quenched passions so great and powerful. For we must consider this also, that had the woman been faint-hearted, as being their mother, she would have lamented over them, and perhaps might have spoken thus, Ah, wretched I, and many times miserable, who have boring 7 sons, have become the mother of none. O 7 useless childbirths, and 7 profitless periods of labor, and fruitless giving of suck, and miserable nursing at the breast. Vainly for your sakes, O son, I have endured many pangs, and the more difficult anxieties of rearing. Alas, of my children, some of you unmarried, and some of you who have married to no profit, and shall not see your children, nor be felicitated as a grandmother. That I, who had many and fair children, should be a lone widow of sorrows. Nor should I die, shall I have a son to bury me. But with such a lament is this the holy and Elohim-fearing mother bewailed none of them, nor did she divert any of them from death, nor grieve them as for the dead, but as one possessed with the adamantine mind, and as one being forth again her full number of sons to immortality. She rather with supplication exhorted them to death in behalf of the faith. O woman, soldier of Elohim for the faith, who aged and a female have conquered through endurance even a tyrant, and though but weak, and have been found more powerful in deeds and words. For when you were seized along with your children, you stood looking upon Eleazar in torment, and said to your sons in the Ivrit tongue, O sons, noble is the contest to which you, being called as a witness for the nation, strive zealously for the Torah of your country. For it was disgraceful that this old man should endure pains and sake of tzedakness, and that you who are younger should be afraid of the torments. Remember that through Elohim ye obtained existence, and have enjoyed it, and on this second account ye ought to bear every affliction because of Elohim. For what also our father Abraham was forward to sacrifice Yitzhak our progenitor, and shuddered not at the sight of his own paternal hand descending down with the sword upon him. And the tzedak, the righteousness of Daniel, was cast down into the lions, and Hananiah, and Azariah, and Mishael were slung out into the furnace of fire. Yet they endured through Elohim. You, then, having the same faith towards Elohim, be not troubled, for it is unreasonable that they who know the faith should not stand up against troubles. With these arguments, the mother of 7, exhorting each of her sons, persuaded them from transgressing the mitzvot, the commandments of Elohim. And they saw this, too. They who die for Elohim live to Elohim, as Abraham and Yitzhak and Yaakov and all the patriarchs. EThCeper of Maccabees, chapter 17. And some of the spear-bearers said that when she herself was about to be seized for the purpose of being put to death, she threw herself upon the pile, rather than they should touch her person. O mother, who together with 7 children did destroy the violence of a tyrant, and render void his wicked intentions, and exhibit the nobleness of faith, for you, as a house bravely built upon the pillars of your children, did bear without swaying the shock of torture. Be of good cheer, therefore, O Kodesh-minded mother, holding the firm substance of faith, of your steadfastness with Elohim. Not so gracious does the moon appear with the stars in heaven, as you are established honorable before Elohim, and fixed in the firmament with your sons, who you did not eliminate, with the faith to the stars. For your bearing of children was after the fashion of the child of Abraham. And were it lawful for us to paint as on a table the faith of your story, the spectators would not shudder at beholding the mother of 7 children enduring for the sakes of the faith various tortures, even unto death. And it had been a worth thing to have inscribed upon the tomb itself these words as a memorial to those of a nation. Here, an aged Kohanim, a priest, and an aged woman, and 7 sons are buried through the violence of a tyrant who wished to destroy the polity of the Ivrim. These also avenged their nation, looking unto Elohim, and enduring torments unto death. For it was truly a divine contest which was carried through by them. For at every time virtue presided over the contest, approving the victory through endurance, namely immortality, eternal life. Eleazar was the first to contend, and the mother of the 7 children entered the contest, and the brethren contended. The tyrant was the opposite, and the world and the living men were the spectators. And reverence for Elohim conquered and crowned her own athletes, who did not admire those champions of true legislation, who were not astonished. The tyrant himself and all their council admired their endurance, through which also they now stand beside the Kodesh throne and live a blessed life. For Moshe says that all the Kodeshim, the called out, set apart ones, are under your hands. These, therefore, having been sanctified through Elohim Yahweh, have been honored not only with this honor, but that also by their means the enemy did not overcome our nation, and that the tyrant was punished, and their country purified. For they became the antipoised to the sin of the nation, and the divine providence saved Yisrael, aforetime afflicted, by the blood of those pious ones, and of propitiatory death for the tyrant Antiochus, looking to their manly virtue and to their endurance in torture, proclaimed that endurance as an example to his soldiers, and they proved to be to him noble and brave for land battles and for sieges, and he conquered and stormed the towns of all his enemies.